In this lecture, we are going to talk about postmodern graphic design, and this will be the last lecture in graphic design history, as pretty much everything is now labeled as postmodern or even post-postmodern. And this gets us up almost to the turn of the century, not really touching on the 90s, and I think that's for the best. I know you guys love this throwback to the 90s, but I'm gonna leave it alone. So by the late 1960s, many believed the modern era was drawing to a close. That was in art, it was in design, it was in politics, and in literature. And the social, economic, and environmental awareness of the period caused many to believe the modern aesthetic was no longer relevant in this emerging post-industrial society. So many people in many fields, and this included architects, it included designers, economists, feminists, and even theologians, have embraced this term postmodernism to express a climate of cultural change, a climate that embraced cultural diversity, equality of women, and equality of minorities. So in design, the term postmodern is applied to the work of designers and architects in the last quarter of the 20th century, who broke with the international style, particularly the Swiss design and their adherence to grid and functional typefaces, and that of the Bauhaus and all these movements that were so prevalent since the Bauhaus. So whereas the modernists rejected historical references, decoration, and that vernacular, postmodern designers drew upon these resources to expand the range of design possibilities. They were a bit opening up. So some do believe that since the 1990s, we are in that postmodern era. Here's some beautiful work by Swiss designer Rosemary Tisci, done in 1981. And the tendencies toward postmodern graphic design really emerge from these individuals who are working still within the dictates of the international typographic style, such as Rosemary Tisci. While the main thrust of the Swiss style had been toward neutral and objective typography, this younger generation introduced elements that were much more playful, they were full of surprise, they were full of color, and sometimes even disorganized. So Tisci, who was born in 1937, has this really playful sense of form and unexpected manipulation of space. She's shifting the scale and the orientation of these letters and using bright yellow to create that negative space. So this is a direct mail folder for an offset printing firm's archives, and the typographic vitality is created by those overlapping and combining letter forms as well as their orientation, color, and scale. Now, Tadanori Yoku is incredible. I think you guys are going to love his work. So he was born in 1936, and his style really combines Western and Eastern images and style. He combines elements from Dada art, from mass media, from pop art, and from comic books. And he really, early on in the 1960s, he used this comic book technique of black line drawings as a vessel to contain these flat areas of color. And then as it developed, he developed his design vocabulary and range of art and printing techniques, and they became increasingly uninhibited. And it was for this, his shifting values and rejection of tradition, that really caused him to gain a cult reputation. I also want to talk about Shujio Fukuda. And the work of Shujio Fukuda is disarmingly simple and readable, and really almost contains a visual pun. He became well known for this unconventional view of the world, and the New York Times described Fukuda's posters as distilled complex concepts into compelling images of logo simplicity. This poster right here was awarded a first prize in an international competition for a poster commemorating the 30th anniversary of the end of World War II. So what we see here is this bullet returning. It's shifted around, so it's returning back into whatever you call this on a gun. I don't know weapon language, but I do love the simplicity and this simple shift and flipping of the narrative. Wolfgang Weingart was quite interesting. he really questioned the Swiss typographic style that was of absolute order and cleanness. He thought that the international style had become so refined and prevalent that it really is boring and had lost its appeal. It was so omnipresent that it was not interesting at all anymore. So he pioneered this new wave typography movement. And you can see in this poster, he uses these modulated patterns, these overlapping shapes and color to really structure the space. And Switzerland is actually implied here in the shape of the Matterhorn, which is a mountain in Switzerland. You can see it back here. And he traveled to the US and delivered presentations at 8 prominent design schools. And this new design sensibility began to filter into the American design profession, and who had really become bored with this redundancy of sans serif, grid-based corporate systems. Now, the Memphis group and the Memphis design group was actually in Italy, but we do have a member of them here in Echo Park, Peter Shire. So it was an important inspiration for all areas of design, and started in 1981. And the global attention was really concentrated on an exhibition of Italian design of this design group, the Memphis group. They decided on this name to reflect on inspiration that they drew from both contemporary popular culture and the artifacts and ornaments of ancient culture. Memphis is actually an important city in ancient Egypt. So in their designs, function became very secondary to surface pattern, texture, color, and these fantastic forms. The Memphis sensibility embraces exaggerated geometric forms in bright colors and in black and white, and is definitely symbolic of the 80s. And Peter Shire, who is a ceramicist who has a studio here in Echo Park, would make these fantastic furnitures and teapots that had these geometric shapes and stripes and pops and balls of color on them. So Christopher Roddy actually headed the Memphis graphic design section, and you can see that pattern is used extensively in this typographic expression and the series of logo designs. Here's this beautiful poster by William Longhauser for a Michael Graves exhibition. Now we're in 1983, and you can really see how pattern is still prevalent, and this is early digital world. So he himself is a Philadelphia graphic designer and was very much influenced by postmodern design. This poster is for the work of Michael Graves, who's also a postmodernist architect and one who rebelled against modernist tradition. So Graves himself combines energetic, high-spirited geometry of decorative surfaces and tactile repetition of patterns. So here you can see in the background of the poster that Longhauser created repetitive dots in a grid that actually spells out the letters of Michael. Now, Paula Scher, I've talked about her, and I wish you guys had been around in the 80s to understand how big a craze and movement the Swatch watch was. You would go to the mall to get your new Swatch watch band. And, this is early on. So during 1980s, graphic designer for Paula Scher, sorry, I didn't finish that thought. Early in Paula Scher's career. So in 1980s, graphic designers gained a growing understanding and appreciation of their history. So movement based on historical revival really first emerged in New York and spread rapidly through the world. And it was called retro by some designers. Is based on an interest in modernist European design from the first half of the century. So this is postmodern, and they're really looking back and making historical references, which you can very much see in this work by Paula Scher, who's an incredible outspoken designer who has a very ironic sense of humor and a really incredible approach to space, color, and texture that often is very personal and original. But in this design, she was parodying, she produced a parody of a famous Herbert Matter poster from the 1930s. So here on the left, you can see the poster, original poster by Herbert Matter, and the run by Paula Scher for Swatch on the right. Here's a page from her book called Great Beginnings, talking about Metamorphosis and Franz Kafka. And I thought this was quite influential also for the project on which you're working on the song typographic poster design. Also to look for in your next project, which will be an editorial layout based on a graphic designer or graphic design movement. So typographic ideas paraphrasing Russian constructivism, futurism, and Dada are freely combined and reinvented with forms and space packed together with weight and vigor of old world type posters. Cher originally formed the Koppel and Cher studio in partnership with Terry Koppel, and this was their booklet to announce their new partnership. With period typographic interpretations of the first paragraphs of great novels. So it was like a type specimen book, but really it was a promotional for their new company. She now works for Pentagram, which is a really, really influential design studio that has offices in New York, London, Berlin, San Francisco, and Austin, Texas. I've referenced them often. Let's talk about Neville Brody and his amazing editorial designs. Here's one for Warhol. Look at that circling and underlining. How wonderful. So he's a British graphic designer who created a lot of album covers for rock music, and he art directed English magazines, including The Face and Arena. He's very much inspired by Russian constructivism, and including the work by Rodchenko and Dada's experimental attitudes and rejections of the ruling establishment. His work evolved from this effort to discover an intuitive yet logical approach to design, an expression of a personal vision that could have meaning to his audience. So it wasn't only inwardly looking, but really looking for this logical approach that could express his personal vision to connect to an audience. So his ability to load his layouts with layers of meaning, as seen in this spread of an interview with Andy Warhol. So he repeated the image of Andy Warhol, which echoed the work of Andy Warhol, and then he has that cross and circle that I pointed out to refer to the sexuality in Warhol's work and life. So he would load his designs with these hidden meanings, or these not subversive, but maybe subconscious meanings. Here's an album cover design for Parliament. Well, he stated that he never learned the rules of correct typography, and that left him free to invent working methods and spatial configurations. His typographic projects, typography projects an absolute emblematic authority that evokes heraldry and military emblems. This looks like a crest almost. Now, April Greiman, you can see her work on Wilshire Avenue, actually, near Koreatown. And here's a poster for the LA Institute of Contemporary Art. So she really much, April Greiman very much really embraced digital technology. While many, many designers were rejecting it, she used it as this very innovative tool and thought of it as capable of expanding the scope and the field of graphic design. A lot of her work are projections, including this one that's on Wilshire. Using a computer as a design tool enabled her to make and correct mistakes, and enabled all to do that. So color, texture, images, and typography could be stretched, not distorted though. They could be bent, they could be made transparent, they could be layered and combined in very unprecedented ways. And then they could be delivered in new ways as well. So she's a Los Angeles designer that really embraced this technology and pushed and explored its creative potential. In her first graphic design, using Macintosh bitmap type and computer-generated textures, were photostatted to large size and pasted up through conventional typesetting. Now, Rudy Vanderlans, this is a cover for Emigre, which was a magazine that he put together with his partner, Susanna Lico. And this was up in San Francisco. He was Dutch born, but he was living in San Francisco. And the journal's name was selected because its founders, Rudy and Susanna, believed that exposure to various cultures, as well as living in different cultural environments, had significant impact on creative work. And I definitely encourage you guys to take advantage of leaving LA if you've never left LA, or seeking out opportunities to live somewhere else, and particularly in another culture, to expand your knowledge and ability to communicate. Emigre's experimental approach helped define and demonstrate the capabilities of digital technology, both in their editorial design and by presenting work that was often too experimental for other design publications. So they used their own personal publication to really push the boundaries and to question the expected. So in this 1989 issue, 3 levels of visual information are layered in dimensional space, which was made possible by using the computer. And Susanna Lico, this is her Hypnopaedia type specimen booklet where she made all these patterns simply out of type. So she formed this partnership with Rudy van der Laans. She herself is Czech-born and was also living in San Francisco and had this background in computer programming. So she's very dissatisfied with those limited fonts that came with the early Macintosh. So she started creating her own digital typeface. And then she created in 1997 this booklet, Hypnopaedia, that contained 140 illustrations made from type. And they were all on the concentric rotation of a single letter form from her own Immigrant Fonts library. Tibor Kalman is really interesting. He's an American graphic designer that was born in Hungary, who has these very innovative ideas about both design and society. He founded M & Co., which is a highly influential New York-based design firm, and their influence is still strong today. And it's because of their work and the designers who work there that he was able to many of them were able to go on and start their own design firms from working there. He moved to Rome and became the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the Benetton-sponsored Colors magazine. So now we're back to Benetton, which was a brand that early embraced brand identity. And they had in their name was Colors of Benetton, and they were very much about a global multiculturalism look. And the perspective was communicated through bold graphic design, typography, and juxtaposition of photographs and doctored images. I can completely remember both Swatch and Benetton, and I was so enthralled with the design capacities and the marketing of them at an early age. I think it really influenced my love for art and design when I could go to the mall. These would be the stores that I would go to. No one else was going to them, and I was just like, this is a new world for me. I love the subtle dots in the colors here, which make it into a face or possibly other things. So he did a Talking Heads music video, which was a very innovative use of typography. He also designed their iconic album cover, Remain in the Light. And so originally Talking Heads, which is still around today, David Burns is still doing incredible work. They were a new wave band, and it really combined elements of punk rock, art rock, avant-garde, punk, funk, world music, and Americana. And the lyrics of this particular song described a world where modern progress had been reverted to a more natural state due either to a political movement or by necessity, such as dealing with overpopulation. David Byrne actually just did this incredible play on Broadway that then Spike Lee made into a documentary. I'm forgetting the name, America Utopia. If you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend looking it up. It's amazing. So David Byrne's America Utopia, made by Spike Lee. Do it. Okay, now Dave Carson, who was not always the most popular one in design, and he is a local Southern California designer. He was an art director and designer, and he did a lot of work for Ray Gun. So he was a professional sporter and a school teacher who really turned to design, and that's his look, this Southern California skater surfer influence. He was the art director for Ray Gun, as well as Transworld Skateboarding, Musician, Beach Culture, and Surfer magazines. He rejected grid formats, he rejected information hierarchy, and he rejected consistent layout or typographic patterns. I've shown his work when talking about tension and chaos. He instead chose to explore expressive possibilities of each subject on each page or spread, and his work is considered to be deconstructivist. His text type often challenged the notion of readability, and he would play with justification of type, with letter spacing, with contrast, with texture, with color, with image, with overlapping, with actually physically manipulating and destroying things. So it was very controversial, and he definitely has served as inspiration for many young designers, but he also angered many who believed he was crossing the line between order and chaos. Hence why I often show, or I do show his work when we're talking specifically about tension and chaos, as well as texture and experimental and risks. So I've shown this work. when we talked about chaos as well, but this is Stefan Sagmeister's work. And it is a Lou Reed poster. So Stefan Sagmeister was originally born in Austria. He is now in New York. He is very much known for his rock and roll collaborations and typography, as well as kind of his philosophy and opinions on design. He did a lot of work for the Rolling Stones, David Byrne again, Lou Reed, and Aerosmith. And his graphic design is consistently characterized by uncompromising and harsh directness. So here for Lou Reed, the lyrics of one of his songs are written across his face like graffiti. But he also created a show called, an actual traveling exhibition called The Happy Show, and he made a film. So it was during an artist residency that he decided to create a documentary about happiness, and he funded it through Kickstarter. And the opening titles were created in Bali with pigs and monkeys and trees, tree climbers and a duck. The Happy film will followed Sagmeister as he undergoes a series of self-experiments outlined by popular psychology to test once and for all if it's possible for a person to have a meaningful impact on their own happiness. I really enjoyed this. It's an area that I've been very interested in as well. Now, Chip Kidd is an amazing illustrative, funny book, does a lot of book covers, designer. And this happened to be, the outside was this, and then inside you had this. So he did this for Alfred A. Knopf, and this is a David Sedaris book. So he often used vintage images that he would find, and his visual cues require the viewer to excavate the meaning or the message. He said, I never really know if the readers get the subtle visual puns on my jackets, but I can't let that inform my design to the point where I will compromise. So when the jacket for the book cover design for Naked is removed, the reader gets the surprise. So again, this is the cover, and then if you take the cover off, you get this. And there's this gorgeous book that he did for 10Q84 by Haruko Murakami. So Murakami is this award-winning contemporary postmodern Japanese writer. His writing is frequently surrealistic and melancholic, and Chip Kidd designed all the hardcover editions of Murakami's books. The plot of 10Q84 follows two seemingly unconnected stories that eventually weave together. They involve this woman named Aomami, in Tokyo, and she enters this alternative reality. So the book takes place in 1984, and the Japanese Q sounds like 9. So I think you're supposed to say, I don't know how you're supposed to say it. I'll let you guys puzzle that out. Kidd's book jacket design has 2 layers to suggest the 2 realities of the main character of the book. So it's presented like this. Now, Michael Beirut is another partner at Pentagram in New York, and he just is really smart. He's really generous with his information as well. He's very influential. He's a critic and an educator. He originally worked for Vignelli, as in Massimo Vignelli, and then he became a partner at Pentagram. This poster was designed for this series he did for the Yale School of Architecture. I've shown a lot of their work, a lot of work from this series. I definitely would love you to check it out more in terms of influencing your typographic song poster. So he did a new identity for Saks Fifth Avenue. You see on the left is the original, and on the right where he took the original, basically, he really brought back the 1973 cursive logo that was designed by his former boss, Massimo Vignelli, and he put a grid over the logo, and then he subdivided this into 64 squares, which were then rearranged for the new black and white pattern that is applied to his shopping bags and environmental graphics. So you can see that it's a callback to the original, brought into a new format and a new design. So it's really quite amazing. Here's the evolution. And continuing with that evolution. And it's really wonderful that this was designed by Massimo Vignelli, and then this was designed by Beirut, who worked for Vignelli. Now, Hat Show Print is founded in Nashville, Tennessee, by Charles and Herbert Hatch, and it's one of the oldest continuously running letterpress shops in the U.S. So they've been working for 100 years, and they've created posters and handbill advertisements for all different forms of entertainment, including these traveling circuses or sporting events, state fairs, comedy troupes, movies, musicians, concerts. And they're very closely connected with Nashville's country music scene. So that's allowed them to work with all these amazing musicians like Elvis Presley and Dolly Parton and Hank Williams. And they've also worked with more contemporary ones such as Radiohead or R.E.M., Bob Dylan, and Wilco. And then Imaginary Forces was launched in 1996, and that became a leading designer of film titles using integrating graphic design, motion, interactive media. It was very much inspired by concrete poetry. That's sort of what I'm asking you to do here. That's where poetry, the typographical arrangement of the words is important in conveying the intended effect. So the Dadaists and Surrealists use this idea. And so Imaginary Forces is always experimenting with letter forms and finding this innovative ways of transforming moving type into images. And Karen Fong is one of their main designers, and she did a lot of directing for them, including this promotional film for Herman Miller's and his classic modern furniture company, who tells the viewer to get real. They also did the sequence for Mad Men, which is literally now incredibly iconic, and I can't believe it's from that long ago. That's disturbing, isn't it now? 2007? Oh, my gosh. And we all probably know Mad Men as that period drama TV series in the 1960s that really depicted the changing moods and social mores of 1960 America. And the plot focused on a business of advertising agencies and also the very personal lives of the character. It really was well loved, and the title sequence received an Emmy in 2008. It really is quite amazing. I gotta tell you, I love the Killing Eve title sequence. And what was the other one that I was just dying for the other day? Ozarks is really great too, as is Fargo. So I start watching things based more on their design and their title sequences. Now Muji, so this is Kenya Hera, who is a Japanese graphic designer, and she designs objects and experience that are rooted in Japanese culture, and has been the art director for Muji. If you're not familiar with Muji, Muji's pretty amazing, and there is one here in LA. It's very much distinguished by its design minimalism, with emphasis on recycling, avoidance of waste, and no logo, no brand. So the vision is based on thinking of their simple products not as having no design, but as ultimate design and design perfection. So in 2003, we came up with an image that would act as a vessel to receive the many concepts that individuals had formed about Muji. It's an empty vessel to catch that outpouring of imagination on a large scale. That was the concept. So now this interactive design firm, so now we're in the 2000s, and we're really moving into new fields of technology, and this is Render Monkey. And their work really combines creative interface of design with programming. And that was a big thing that was starting to happen right now. So Render Monkey's design for the exhibition Color Chart at MoMA in New York allowed users to interact with various interfaces for a customized approach and dynamic content. So the exhibition itself featured the work of 44 artists who work with ready-made sources of color, filterable by artist, medium, and chronology. So it created this individual experience with this specific exhibition at MoMA. And now the releasing of the iPad really affected how brands were getting exhibited and how you could experience particularly print. So when the iPad was first released in 2010, can you believe that? Mad Men was before the iPad? That seems crazy to me. It was really Martha Stewart's lifestyle magazine, Living, who was one of the first to embrace this new technology for their magazine. In this particular cover called Boundless Beauty, The cover animates the blooming of a peony flower over a 10-hour period using 180 still photographs. It's really, really beautiful, and this was really groundbreaking in terms of the launch of digital design, and it really changed how editorial designers could approach design. There could be this interactive component to it to increase readers' engagement and to create new visual experiences. So it really changed everything. So we're going to leave it there because everything since is still relatively new and close at hand. And they still do, we really do describe where we're at right now as postmodern. I definitely think there's a lot of looking back while also embracing technology on a new level and really pushing what can be done while keeping this super love for the traditional and an embracing of a sense of realness at the same time. So it's like we're both looking forward and looking backward. At least that's my opinion. I hope you've enjoyed these graphic design lectures, and I look forward to seeing what you do in your next assignment, which will be creating an editorial layout for a graphic designer or graphic design movement of your choice. Refer to the project assignment on Canvas for more information, and of course, reach out if you have any questions or concerns.